Oh, we just
What's that?
recording in progress. Okay.
Is there a third person in Ghost here?
I know, right? It's only just started doing it with the latest update of Zoom. So, yeah, kind of crazy. And it's American too. Those American voices. What do you do? I've changed my my ways to like British and I've not ways. My nav in my car because I can't stand the angry American voice. How are we all? I hope we're all okay. Recovering after assessment 2.
Yep.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Wow, there are a lot to mark. So I will be going right up until the 2-week turnaround point. So yeah, getting there a little bit at a time. A little bit at a time. If you think it's hard doing an assignment, try marking.
Yeah, no thanks.
70 of them.
No thanks.
Woo, wow.
Did everyone submit?
Special brand of fun. No, there are some, well, I've got a stack of extensions that I've granted, so there are all of those yet to roll in. And worryingly, there was about I'm going to say about 10% of the enrollments that didn't submit.
Wow.
Yeah.
The final exam's 50%, so if they haven't submitted, they're putting themselves at a major risk.
I know. We have this weird problem where we get like what they call ghost students. It's really bizarre. It's this glitch in the system that I understand carries on enrolling people. I don't even really haven't wrapped my head around it, but yeah, there's always the inevitable few that haven't. Seen some good ones, seen some average ones, seen some, wow, the usual mix. So
I hope mine wasn't one of those.
Well, I think mine was by the end of it. I was tearing my hair out.
No, I haven't done either of yours. I can honestly say I haven't done either of yours. So
I think I found the technical glitch because I did the update on Zoom, and that combined with I lost my QU. How can you just have your QU law? This is what I can't understand. QU law, my QU law account, which I've used for every assignment when I've had to do YouTube, just disappeared. Okay, so and I've had no problem with every other assignment where I've had to do an upload to YouTube, no problem whatsoever. And on Saturday when I went to do the upload, because I'd done it all, everything was fine, nothing. And I just couldn't believe it. I had to keep taking retakes because it was too long, you know what I mean? And shortening it because someone said in the word count I think it's my fault, was it, last week, the word count, and I thought, oh no, the word count's over. So I kept dropping it down, taking out, refining it. So I'd done about 20 takes, so I was getting a bit tired, and I thought, all right, now I'm ready to, do the final takes. So that was all good. I was under 9 minutes because I looked at the thing and it said, I will not look past 9 minutes. And then I sent you that email. I said, what, you really won't look past 9 minutes? I thought, oh God, I better chop that out. So then I thought, okay, I'm fine. I'm under 9 minutes, all good. And then the QU law account wouldn't go. So I spent a whole day and then I had to find a way to get it onto, that was my last minute panic, to get it onto, all day it took me to just find a way to get it onto, because I'm not good at technology, to get it onto a platform on YouTube. And but how does your QU law thing disappear? It won't recognise it on Google. Now, even at the beginning of this semester, I had to do a short video for another subject, and it was there. Now Google says no such account is recognised.
that's weird.
And then I went back to Intro to Law where it was set up for our very first thing, which for me was back at term 3 last year. And I tried to redo it again, and it wouldn't let me do it because the same passwords, it said, no, you've already got one. But I couldn't get it. So, but
did you speak to Tazak at all?
I haven't had time because I've got a deadline on another assignment. Like we had 2 assignments due both on the Monday, and the other lecturer was getting tons of demand. She's got 200 students. That's in constitutional law. A week before, she'd put up a, do you want a week's extension, and the extension won. So everyone got an extension, and so we concentrated on your one. And so I'm now finishing off that one for next Monday. So I haven't had time, but I'm going to contact them to find out where it's gone and how this could possibly happen. But what had happened was over the weekend, when I went back to Zoom, at one stage it said you need to update to the new version. And I updated to the new version, and then for some reason, when I went to YouTube, it came out all, it just came out in the length of it came out all wrong, and I've never done it. And when I contacted YouTube to say, how come this is video, I contacted the YouTube people, and they said to me, oh, that's because you use the such and such version, such and such of Zoom. That's why the time frame came out. So it's come out over 9 minutes, as I told you, right? And so I'm thinking, oh, great. Well, at that point, I was at my wit's end. And I thought, well, if you're going to stop at 9 minutes, you'll lose the conclusion on my estoppel, you know. But I'd had enough then. Can you imagine how many takes and retakes? I just thought, well, that's it. I'll either, you know, not be able to submit it, or I can't do it again because I've had it. But I just couldn't understand the technology. But I have to get onto Task because that's the one job I haven't been able to get onto because I haven't had. I've had problems with Telstra this week because where I live remotely, I've had no mobile phone. The tower's cut off, and I've had intermittent internet and phone. So when I've had it, I've downloaded everything and watched the videos I've had to watch, and so that I can do the readings and everything while having it at the phone. So and the internet.
Yeah, I know the woes of internet. Oh,
well, usually it's fine this time of year. My biggest problem is the third semester because we have the rain season. So last year I actually moved to relatives down south, or friends that I call relatives down south, to ensure I had good internet because it was just terrible. Yeah. I went from I think for the first 2 months, and then just no internet because the storms come and you lose it here. And we are the first to lose it, and we are the last to get it back because there's only 4 people that live in my town.
Oh, the travails of assessment. What can I say? The travails of internet. I spent an hour on the phone to Telstra today myself because I got too excited. I saw this flyer in my mail that said, the NBN is live in your area. And I've been waiting for it because I get like this magical speed of, I think it's 8.9 megabits per second download and about 0.8 upload. So it takes me like most of the day to upload one of these, tutorial videos. And I got this flyer saying NBN is live. I'm like, woohoo! And then of course I didn't ring the alternative supplier because it was like, NBN is us kind of thing. It was just insert name of generic supplier here. I thought, if I jump ship from Telstra, I'm gone. So I rang Telstra and said, get me onto the NBN. I just got this flyer from this alternative supplier, please. And they had me on hold for like half an hour, and they came back and said, we're sorry, it's not live yet. And I'm like,
well, it's not even coming to this area. But trying to get my property on the market anyway because I've got to get out of here. And so that's my task between semesters this year, to get it.
Yeah.
There's a noxious weed I've got to eradicate from 208 acres, which is going to be a great joy to do. So which came with the kangaroos and the floods and stuff like that last year. So but it's just hopeless. But NBN here in our area, like the nearest town to me, which is like a fair way away, but the nearest town to me is Bundaberg, and there's been the worst rollout. My friend that lives in South Command, they went to NBN and they had no virtual internet whatsoever.
Yeah.
They virtually can't get any emails, and this is like since 4 months ago. It's been the worst town in terms of internet NBN rollout disaster ever.
Oh no.
It's not coming here. It's not even ever coming here where I am.
Oh, as much as I'd love to talk about technology all evening,
Yeah.
do you have any actual contract issues that we would like to just?
Yeah, with Telstra, because they won't give me a refund, and I've had more than I've had more days without internet and phone than I have with it.
I've moved the discussion on, Mary, to contract stuff now.
Yeah, I'm talking about the contract with Telstra.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about either frustration or damages. And yeah, so can we I'm just thinking, did you have any queries from the frustration side of things?
The other thing that I was concerned about was the cases that you asked us to look at for week 9. There were 2 cases from last week's readings. Did I get that correct? Because you asked us to look at they are week 8 readings, the Kadolfa and Fibrosa case readings. They're actually from
That's just from the header. Yeah, your header in
your header and your email.
They were last week. That wasn't for this week.
No, it says week 9, the header.
Yeah, I know, but those readings were from last week. It's just that part hasn't been updated.
I just wanted to check because I reread them again, but I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, that you're right. That's incorrect. We needed to do chapter 23 damages.
Yeah, I did read the correct chapters that were in the part down the bottom, but I went over those again, just thinking, well, am I confused or are you confused or what?
Sorry, no, that was my bad. I will I'll correct that. No,
that's okay.
But it's useful to think a little bit more carefully about frustration, and particularly from last week. We went through in the tutorial, the various different cases for frustration, and we had a little look at the various categories of frustration. You will note that the tutorial problem for this week, did you pick up that there is, from the kind of oblique question that you
couldn't understand it again, sorry.
From the question that is asked this week, this little problem actually crosses over. It's quite a good one because it crosses over a number of different areas that we've already had a look at. We won't go through the problem just yet, but it does cover off areas of frustration. It also looks at damages. It also touches on the issue of total failure of consideration. And that's the total failure of consideration stuff I've hived off until next week. But did anybody, where did you get to with your readings on damages for this week?
I got through it all.
Wow, good on you, Mary. That's
when you got no internet and phone, that's what happens.
Maybe that's a good thing. So did you want to kind of, because in between 7 and 8, we can kind of unpick the tutorial problem per se, but did you want
I can't get that. I still couldn't understand. I listened to it 5 times, that silly comic thing.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. We'll unpack that between.
You unpack that, and then I can help you maybe unpack the rest.
Yeah, we'll unpack that between 7 and 8. But what I'm keen to do now is kind of do a little cook's tour of anything that you wanted to clear up in terms of your understanding of damages, because there's a lot of ground that's covered this week.
We're concurrently doing it in Torts B. Did you know that?
More than likely, although that obviously...
We're actually doing damages.
Yeah, that'll be tortious damages.
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff like the ACL, like a lot of that, we're actually doing that, but in the tortious way. So I found that really easy reading, actually, because it's contract damages, but I found it fairly easy reading, actually. I was really surprised. Like, I thought, oh, you know, this, I'll have damages, you know, all this. But I found it quite good because we're doing it concurrently in actual Torts B, which was on Monday, you know, and like even the exam is going to be based, a lot of it's going to be based on it, to the point that the tip was actually print out the ACL and the parts applicable for torts, you know, and I thought, well, this followed quite well. And a lot of the stuff that you were saying, like in the study guide, and then I went to the readings, and the way that you presented it was good because I found that much clearer to understand first before I went to the textbook. Because they then, the way that they presented it is a bit more, it was not as well put together as the way that you did it in the study guide. So.
Right, now that's I won't take credit for that because that was Anthony's baby, but it's the issues are not terribly conceptually hard. There's just a few things to juggle. And Tam, did you do torts? And Michael, did you do torts a while ago, or are you yet?
I've not done torts at all.
You haven't done tort at all. And what about Michael?
I did Torts A last semester, Torts B this semester.
Okay, so you're in Mary's boat and you're doing tortious damages at the moment as well? Yeah. Okay, that's all good. There are a number then, there are a couple of you that can answer this. There are a number of fairly important differences between damages in contract and damages, tortious damages. You got through chapter 23 in both books. Wow, Michael's eyes are bleeding. I just saw you chat. So what is the main distinction between contractual damages and tortious damages?
Well, basically there's a contract involved usually, and in tortious damages it's to do with some sort of negligence, and so therefore you're looking at the elements of negligence. So you've got to go through them first and meet the different elements that you've got to meet to start with to get to your position. Okay, but you still, the burden of proof is on you, the plaintiff, and then there's different considerations that have to take place before you get to that point, and then. Because you've got a contract, you've got to unpack the actual contract in the same way you've got to unpack the process and the causations. And as you said, like there's causations and things can change in torts, like there could be a break in the causation link. There can be all those different things that lead then into the damages, and then you've got the remedy of damages and the remedy of damages in both, but there's more like statutes and that involved in contract law that you don't have as or like you can still have some statutory things that come in, like to contribute to like your own damages, but you don't have. Even I was noticing the ACL between contract law and between like say the tort of negligence, which is what we're doing at the moment, for example, and the remedies to do with that. That's mainly what we're focused on in Torts B. What main difference I can see is that you're unpacking a contract is very different in terms of how it's looked at in the as opposed to you're going through the actual act, say, of negligence, which has brought you to a decision. Was there a negligent act, duty of care, all these different other aspects?
Okay, I think, Mary, you are right in the thick of Torts P at the moment. And I guess you're kind of in the forest and looking at all the, you can't see the wood for the trees. What I was actually asking was quite a simple question.
Oh.
And that is, where do you get the plaintiff? What point are you aiming to get the plaintiff into when you are looking at damages in contract?
To where they would have been if the contract was completed.
Yes. Mostly, yes.
Which was interesting in Oman, where they talked about putting them back in the position if the contract never happened.
Hey, man, you don't want to read late at night.
No, that's one of the ones that hurts.
It really messed with your head.
Just when you read it twice or three times, when you're reading one for that and then the other for lost opportunity.
I know. It just messes with your head. But mostly, if we can deal with some very nice, very comforting generalizations, yes, in contract, the aim is to get the plaintiff into the position as if the contract had been performed. And that is sometimes called what kind of damages?
Restitution.
Nope, expectation. It's what you expected to make out of the contract. Okay. Those kinds of damages will often be more lucrative than the tortious measure, because the tortious measure is designed to get the plaintiff into what point? Ultimately, where do you want to put how are you going to restore them?
Well, you can't in most cases, so you're aiming to get the best kind of damage.
As much as money can do it, you're trying to put the plaintiff in the position as if what?
They hadn't been injured or suffered any damage.
As if the tortious conduct
had not occurred.
Yeah. Yes. So where they've suffered injury,
yeah,
you're trying to, so far as money can do it, and I agree, it's often a very limited and very crude, blunt instrument, you're trying to get them into that position as if that tort hadn't been committed. So it's often got to do with your out-of-pocket costs. You know, if you've got this ongoing management of an injury, how much is it going to cost? And you're going to have to lead evidence in front of the court as to, how you're going to have to manage that injury. And that's going to all play into your assessment of damages, for example, that you recover from the bus driver that hit you with the bus. Well, it wouldn't be the bus driver, it would be, the bus company, because they've got the deeper pockets. Yes, so you are looking to get yourself back to the position monetarily as if that hadn't occurred. So, and when you're looking at the ACL, what is the usual measure under the ACL? I know I'm just looking to see if you've mentioned that you've discussed this in torts. So for those watching the video, we'll discuss ACL probably a little bit more next week. But what's the go?
Is that the tortious method?
Well, you're talking about torts or contract?
I'm talking about ACL.
Yeah, ACL. Well, in ACL, we rely on mainly
Tortious, do they generally use?
tortious. Yeah, generally now ACL is like sort of the main thing you go to in terms for commerce and stuff like that.
Yes, Mary, listen to
11.
my question. My question is, do they use the tortious measure or the contract measure?
In torts,
No, under the ACL. Under the ACL.
Under the ACL, yeah, section 11.
No, under the ACL, do they use the tortious measure or the contract measure?
Well, they use the tortious measure.
Can you give me the case?
Well, I was just going to use the one that we used for the assignment, but that's fictitious. There's and I was just going to say the Juniper Point Eatery because we just about had enough of that. Let me just think the case names. That's what I'm not good at remembering.
Can anyone else jump in?
Michael, what's the case that we use for the?
We'll probably talk about this a bit more next week because I know a lot of people will be pushing on with the reading in relation to this, over this week and next week. But Henjo Investments is the big one that you normally talk about in terms of measuring monetary damages under the ACL, and it is usually the tortious measure because generally speaking, it makes sense because you are looking at misleading or deceptive conduct, particularly under Section 18. And if you're looking at getting damages, so far as we're concerned, in contract law, if you turn into the ACL for damages and or the other funky remedies that you can get,
all that, yeah.
There's a lot of other things that you can get, which is kind of cool. It may or may not involve a contract, and because it's legislative, it's a legislative instrument that you're looking at, because you are not confined to that narrower field of playing around with what's happened to a contract, but it's much more broadly pitched at conduct in general. Then you need to be going to the tortious measure. It doesn't make sense to be using the contractual measure. Okay, and normal things, funky things that you can look at in contract law, like lost opportunity and that kind of thing. The only way that you can get anything remotely close to expectation losses under the ACL is where you can actually lead evidence to show that, but for this misleading or deceptive conduct, there was actually this opportunity that you would have taken up, and it would have given you this amount of saving or this amount of profit. That's pretty much the only time that you can try and seek damages like that under the ACL.
In the construction industry, we have it's a common thing when builders say you've got standard plans and another builder uses your plans for a client and builds for them, they get reimbursed lost profits, even though they didn't build the house because they've used your plan and they should have built with you.
Yeah. So, and that would be called copyright.
Yep. But it was just funny, I was reading that going, it's the exact same thing we always worried about, just always someone brings a plan and you're like, oh, take it away. I just don't want to even look.
Come and do IP law with me. I'm running it next year, hopefully, if I can twist things up.
Which unit? Oh, copyright?
Intellectual property. Yeah. Intellectual property, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's cool fun. It is a very fun little area of law. But yes, that is one thing you should not do. In fact, I thought it was rather hilarious on the block this week, because as you guys know, I'm a fan of the block, and they had a challenge where the groups had to create a sculpture that was going to be placed in their apartments that they're redecorating, and quite a number of the groups just got straight onto Pinterest and got pictures of the artwork that they wanted to recreate. And as an IP lawyer, I'm immediately thinking, because obviously if you're an artist, you have copyright in your art form, your sculpture, and it's a really interesting little thing. Like, even you were talking about building something 3D from plans, that's a breach of copyright, but also building a 3D structure from a photo of another 3D structure. I mean, if there's so many layers of copyright involved in that, I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I wonder if the makers of the block realised just how many IP laws were being broken, like right in front of 100 million, I don't know how many million viewers there were, but no, it wouldn't be 100 million because there's only 20 million in Australia. You know what I mean? It was just like, wow. So
you have to be pretty irresponsible to put something with copyright on Pinterest as well. Admittedly, you'd be the maker of
Pinterest is an interesting little.
Surely the block's got a pretty good legal team.
You would think.
Hopefully they did their due diligence first.
I don't know so much.
The block wouldn't be liable. They didn't do it, did they? So.
Well, it's interesting. They have them broadcast.
They're broadcasted.
They broadcast the infringement. It's an interesting little problem. Maybe I should set that as one of my problems next term. I'm just not.
That'd be great.
I'm just not supposed to be teaching it, because I've been teaching two term. I will have been teaching 2 terms straight, but we'll see. Anyway.
Hey Jay, sorry, can I just digress for a moment? Going back to when we were talking about what type of damage it is, and you said expectation damage, is that also commonly known as general damages? Or is that just general damages just way too broad and it's not used for that specific term?
General damages, okay, so...
You see it written everywhere.
Yeah, I know, right? You know what I'll do? I will briefly share my very nutty desktop with you at the moment. But let me see if I can find for you. This is really interesting. Now, where are we? Here, this one. No, it's Baltic. Now, no, it wasn't this one. Okay. Now, let me just search for 35,000 because that's the magical figure. Okay, here. Now, this is the immediate precursor to the High Court decision in Baltic Shipping and Dillon. And I love that case. And it weaves into the tutorial problem for this week. But general damages is kind of like an umbrella term. And general damages are assessed by the court. And there are a number of different heads of general damages. So you'll see in terms of the court here is just given, if that was a really long way of saying, general damages are usually assessed by the court, and general damages is like an umbrella term from which you hang, wasted expenditure, expectation loss, you can hang off mental distress and all of that kind of stuff, right? That's all weighed up by the court. And as they say in the Poseidon case, it really is, it's a gamble. whenever you're asking for damages, because there's no precise art form to it, really. You're at the mercy of the court, and whoever has the better argument will more than likely be the party that gets the damages that they want. In the Poseidon case, you can see just how hard they're struggling. And they say, look, there's nothing scientific about this. They're just completely honest. And this was when they were trying to work out, this was one of those lost opportunity cases, that Poseidon case. I think that they said that there was something like less than a 20% chance that this eventuality would have happened. So you're really almost pulling figures out of the air, and a lot of it goes by gut feel. So general damages, umbrella term, assessed by the court, heads of damage hang underneath that. That is on one side. On the other side, you have liquidated damages. And they are the damages that, generally speaking, are... Have you...
Those set in the contract.
Yes. And the danger of including a liquidated damages clause in your contract would be...
Not making them like penalties.
Yes. The danger is that it's going to be struck down as a penalty.
Interim?
Yes, interim.
That's it.
Interim. Yeah, so if obviously the greatest amount of harm that you can suffer is about $2,000, then imposing liquidated damages of $250,000 is probably going to get struck down. Nice try, but it won't be enforced.
So under that general damages umbrella, you've got like lost profit, wasted expenditure, rectification of defective work, lost opportunity, and then the non-economic losses such as mental distress, which has then your physical discomfort and your contracts for enjoyment and relaxation. Are they all under that general damages umbrella?
Yeah, because
so then your separate umbrella would then be liquidated damages.
Yeah,
where penalties fall under. Is that right?
The doctrine of penalties falls under the area of law that when you're looking at liquidated.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So general damages assessed by the court, liquidated damages try to be assessed by the parties as a genuine pre-estimate of loss. That's it. They're your buzzwords that you're going to be using. As you will have seen from your reading, there's a load of ways that people have tried to get around all of the doctrine of penalty, blue pencil, striking things out. But these were the heads of damage that were originally awarded, the ones that I have highlighted on screen. These are the ones that were originally awarded by the lower court, by Carruthers in the lower court for Baltic Shipping and Dillon. So you've got this one, personal injuries there, $35,000. Now you've got to remember though, this was 25 years ago, so this was 1993. In fact, this was earlier than 1993. This was, I think it first got before Carruthers in about 1988, 1989. So, $35,000 for personal injury in those days was a fair amount of money. She also claimed the restitution of her fare for her cruise, loss of money, jewellery and baggage, and the one that we look at mostly, I guess, in Contract B is the damages for disappointment and distress, which was, in nowadays terms, $5,000 doesn't seem like very much, but it was good that she fought on that point because she got that in addition to her damages for personal injuries. This is why I like to go back to, and I'm such a nerd, but this is why I like to go back to the actual case law, because sometimes, and I don't ask you guys to do it very often, I do ask you to do it for assessments, but just on the way through with the ordinary topics from week to week, I don't ask you to go to the case law, but this is where it is fairly instructive, because the snippets that they give you in the case book on this don't really tell you a whole lot about the background to the case. And there's just a bit of a danger that you come to the end of your readings on Baltic shipping, and you think, oh, you know, Shani got $5,000 for a sunken ship. You know, that's not a whole lot of compensation for all of the distress that would have gone on for you know, having to clamber down the emergency ladder off the side of a ship that was going to the bottom of the sea. And the other thing that you don't get the sense of was the magnitude of her loss. And that's why I don't want you thinking that she just got the $5,000. She also did get that $35,000 for personal injuries. And the personal injuries involved were post-traumatic stress and severe psychological damage. The background to it, again, this doesn't really come out in the case book, but the background to it was that the poor thing had lost her husband in July 1986, I think it was, or 1987. And then she was in deep depression over this bereavement. And I think it was one of her kids talked her into going on this cruise to try and lift her spirits. And this was only in the October, so July, August, September, October, 3 months later, her kids finally say, you know, come on, Mum, get yourself on a cruise, get yourself out of it. So Dear Love packs up not only her stuff that she wanted to take on the cruise, but she took things like mementos that her husband had sent her, poems that her husband had written for her, photos of her husband, letters that he had written to her, and all of these were lost when the ship went down. So not only had she suffered this awful bereavement and all of the usual, you know, stuff that goes along with that, but in a very fairly rapid amount of time, she pinned her hopes on going on this lovely cruise and having some of her joie de vivre, you know, reignited, and then it just turned her life upside down, and lost a lot of stuff that was very, very dear to her. And I just didn't want you coming to the end of, because this case, there is a point to why I'm telling you all this. This case does figure in to the two problems that we're going to look at in just a minute. But you kind of get to the readings at the end of the case book and you think, oh, $5,000 isn't really very much for damages for distress, but she didn't actually just get that. And the thing that makes the case kind of unique is that there was no real issue. I mean, there was a bit of a fight that they put up about the damages for the personal injuries, but she had quite an eminent psychologist give evidence for her that she had suffered quite a lot of, you know, psychological harm as a result of the ship going down. So there was that component there of $35,000. Originally, the shipping company tried to deny liability for this, but it was fairly clear she could show that level of, you know, psychological harm. One of the interesting points, I guess, if you're looking at torts B kind of stuff, it's a different kind of negligence that they were fighting over here. So there was a discussion over negligence, but it wasn't the ordinary negligence that you would think of when you're talking about negligence. It was a failure to perform the contract obligations with due care. And originally the shipping company said, no, we're not liable. We don't think we're liable. It was the fault of our captain of the ship, who should have avoided these rocks, didn't avoid the rocks, and you know, ultimately they accepted vicarious liability. So that's a term that the torts people should be familiar with. Yes? So let me hear you say it. What happens when with vicarious liability? Is the company liable for, so should
They're
that?
liable for the actions of someone else.
Yes, employee, servant, agent.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So originally the shipping company tried to deny liability. They ended up copping to it. And so this is a distinct form of negligence in terms of a failure to perform contractual obligations with due care. Now, they got the damages, as I said, $35,000 for the personal injury. What she fought so hard for was this as well. And that's what we are interested in terms of the disappointment and distress. So all up, she got $40,000, which in 1993 was not a bad figure. I don't know what that would equate to in today's terms, but I didn't want you to leave your ruminations on this case just thinking that that's all she got, even though the whole ship had sunk. Okay, so she also got here, and this is something that Mary was talking about before. It's not always possible to put for money to compensate for the loss that was suffered. And here, where you've lost poems that were written to you from your husband, I mean, how do you put a price on that? This is what I'm talking about in terms of general damages that are assessed by the court. There's no science to this. So this is the stuff that the court has to grapple with. How do you put a figure on all that? It's much easier to put a figure on jewellery or the cash that she had on her or the second-hand value on her baggage or whatever clothing she lost. But there was a whole lot of other stuff as well. So that's the figure that they came up with for that. They also sought interest because, things had dragged on for so long. And so what she ended up with at the end of the day, can you tell me, after having read from the case book, I can tell you that the damages for personal injuries stuck. So she got her $35,000 for that. What about the disappointment and distress? Did that stick or not stick? Did she get that? Can you? So this
I have to look it up. I read too much to remember little details.
I'm not surprised.
Michael's asked me to mute. I don't know why.
Yes.
I had trouble unmuting all the time, but yes, she did. She got damages for it.
She did get damages for it. And if you go to the actual case, I'll just search on. Okay, so this is Dean and Dawson down the very bottom here. I'm looking at. Okay, so here this is what will kind of Dean and Dawson. So in your case book, they mainly look just at Mason's decision. So Dean and Dawson, they say, nonetheless, we've come to the conclusion that any upwards adjustment of the $5,000 can't be justified. Viewed against the emotional scars and psychological trauma, including a sense of panic, continued preoccupation with the event, nightmares, jumpiness, poor concentration, hypervigilance, has received a part of the fare to cover the lost final days. And here you find it, and this is what tipped
$5,000, yeah, it was good.
So she has been compensated under another head of damages for those emotional scars and that trauma. And they're talking about the $35,000. Okay? So the award of an additional $5,000 represents more than adequate compensation for any disappointment and distress. Okay? So you don't get that sense from what you get out of the of the casebook, but that is what went down. So it's kind of rare in contracts to have, so many, it was the one event that happened, but she got the personal injury amount, plus she also got the additional $5,000 for the distress and disappointment. So both mainly psychological forms of harm, but different. Do you see what I mean? So one was the personal injury, the PTSD and all of that kind of stuff, and then an additional $5,000 for the disappointment side of things. Now, it's important that you recognise the basis for them awarding the damages for disappointment. So why? Because normally, if you think about it, and they talk about it in the decision itself, normally, even if I made, I don't know, with Michael, I agreed with Michael to buy one of the houses that, he's interested in. Are you a real estate agent or are you?
Property developer.
Property developer, okay. So I'm buying a house, a flat off the plan from you, right? Something goes horribly pear-shaped and I can't get my apartment from you. Tam is selling me a car and for some reason, she decides not to sell it to me even after we'd made the contract. Now, clearly, if there's a breach there and if something had gone wrong on Michael's end, selling me the apartment, there would be a breach there. In both cases, I don't get what I bargained for. Why? And I would be obviously fairly disappointed. Why can't I get disappointment damages for those kinds of scenarios, but Mrs. Dillon could?
Doesn't the contract actually have to be based on the enjoyment or relaxation? Like, isn't that the basis for the contract to be able to be awarded those damages?
Yes. And the point I guess I was trying to make was when you are looking at the whole spectrum of contractual activity, every time you have a breach of contract that has, any more than de minimis effect, anytime that happens, you're going to get disappointed, aren't you? There's going to involve a certain amount of distress. Some people are prone to distress. So I might be a really stressed person and Tam's changed her mind and she's not going to sell me the car anymore, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, my life is ending. Now,
they based that contract on the fact that going on a cruise was supposed to be leisurely and, a place to take time out and to enjoy yourself, and that's how they got around it.
That's how they got around it. But you can see my point, can't you? They have to limit the instances where they let in a claim for distress, because otherwise there would just be, the floodgates would open and the courts would be inundated with people trying to claim for distress for every single breach of every single contract. Do you know what I mean? The court system just would be in chaos. So that's why they have hemmed this into rather a small corner of the contractual universe. And the general rule is you just can't get them. And there's just these little exclusions. So there's this one where the contract was specifically for pleasure, relaxation. In the Baltic case, they use the rather quaint, I think they use it from a 19th century case. They say, when the object of the contract is freedom from molestation or freedom from something, freedom from stress and molestation or something like this. So the object, then they rephrase it in modern day terms and they say pleasure, enjoyment and so forth, where that's the object of your contract. That is then going to be fair game for you claiming damages for mental distress.
So I'm going to make an assumption here. Given that the Titanic was actually a point-to-point, not necessarily for a pleasure, I'm assuming that that probably wouldn't get past, because that was actually a transportation ship, although it was very well equipped.
Isn't that interesting? The other thing that you can claim that is like a sister claim to this, and see if I can find it for you in the text, because it's interesting. There's 3 or 4 little points. Here we are. Okay, this is the first point here, where the breach of contract has caused physical injury, personal injury to the plaintiff. And this is the $35,000 that Mrs. Dillon got. But in something like that, and the case that they cite in the text, no, it's not, 187. Oh, that one was physical discomfort. Yeah. So where you've got actual personal injury, I would think if you had suffered injury in terms of the Titanic sinking, you should be able to claim for something like that, even though it might not fit under that third head of damage, which they talk about in Dillon, which is the object being enjoyment or freedom from mental distress. So there are 3. So the first one is where the breach of contract has caused personal injury. The second one is, and I love this one, where the plaintiff has suffered actual physical discomfort and inconvenience, and the mental suffering is directly related to the inconvenience. So, and that's the one I think I talk about.
That's the Hobbs case, isn't it?
Yes, that's the Hobbs case. I love that one. So, them having to trudge home in the rain, yeah, that's the inconvenience factor. So where you've got personal injury there, and that was just a straight old transportation contract there, catching a train from point A to point B, contract breached, but there was that element of inconvenience that allowed them to claim. So I think you could probably swing that, even though it wasn't a pleasure cruise. Were there any other kind of parts of the damages chapter that kind of gave you some head-scratching moments? Lost opportunity, I know, is a bit of a messes with your head, but
how often would that be used, though, in I mean, I know the court makes the assessment, not the lawyers, but, I mean, how often would something like that come up? Like, I mean, as you said, it's hard to put a figure on it.
Not very often, as far as I can figure out. I mean, we're still now talking about, Commonwealth and Amman was obviously the really, the big one that tends to get cited.
Well, I saw the Chaplin and Hicks. Is that the...
That's the old one, isn't it?
Yeah, like a tax lotto or a raffle or something like that, and he was claiming lost opportunity in regards to that. I found that one a little bit more, I don't know, weird that you could do that.
Yeah, I think some of these you've got to, I think particularly in nowadays terms where there's so much reliance on the reasonable person and that kind of thing, there is no science involved still, and some of those old principles will still be at play, but I wonder whether they would be held the same way.
So do the judges have actual, a sliding scale, or do they go on prior cases, or do they where do they pull the figures from? Is it from do they have actual books, like judges' books, or?
I was tempted to say from there, but I won't. There is no science to this. It's far less scientific than where you're trying to calculate damages in tort, because in tort, there's
the body and the percentages and all that. Yeah, I know.
There's so many ways that and historically they have been able to quantify the level of damage that has been suffered. But with contract, as I said, when Tam was talking about what's the difference between general damages and other kinds of damage, and then we started talking about liquidated damages, often you will see them grappling. And if you want a bit of humour, probably the Poseidon case is the one to read if you're ever up at 3 a.m. in the morning and you want to see some judicial head scratching. That's a really good one. And they openly acknowledge, that in contractual damages, a lot of it comes down to, you can see it here. The award of an additional $5,000 represents more than adequate compensation for any disappointment and distress. That's not the language of precision, is it? Nah, she's got $35,000 for personal injury. No, what extra could we give her for distress? I don't know, $5,000. That's what she's asked for. Well, we think that sounds like more than adequate. Do you know what I mean? There's not that. In many areas of contract law, you will get a very technical, very precise discussion, but damages tends to not be one of those areas.
So if you have a case like that, it's best that you as a solicitor put in what you think would be a good amount?
Look, it would be a case of forensically, again, bear in mind, this is back in the 80s, so $5,000 wasn't as small an amount as it seems nowadays. But what you would do is you would forensically go back and you would look at similar cases and you would try and work out how much you would ask for under each head.
Okay.
And a lot of it would I guess, part of it is there's a fine line between shooting for the stars and being able to paint that as looking like a reasonable request for compensation. Because remember, at the end of the day, damages in contract here in Australia and in Britain, you're not looking at penalising people as they do in other jurisdictions. Like in the US, it's typical, there's punitive damages for just about everything. There's punitive damages in loads and loads of different areas. But for contractual damages, it's all about compensation. It's not about giving the injured party way more than they deserve. So you've got to be careful when you're framing your amount. It brings to mind some of the discussions that you see in the doctrine of penalties kind of cases when they're striking out those liquidated damages clauses. You can't be seen to be shooting for the stars, because that's not what damages in contract is about. Whenever you're in doubt like that, you come back to first principle, and that is it's about compensation, realistic compensation for what you've actually lost, so far as money can do it.
Are they going to, it's more of a torts question here then, are they going to be more likely to, I use the word punish, but give out more money if it's not such as an accident as a deliberate malicious act?
Yes, and in torts it's quite a different scenario, because they do have, because it's a doctrine of general application and because it's so important. The whole concept of, not to undermine the loveliness of contract law, but when you're thinking about torts, it really is very fundamental to society, isn't it? Because if we didn't have a duty of care to each other, society would be almost impossible to actually operate. And so there are, doctrines at play there that do involve issues of deterrence and setting amounts at levels that will discourage that kind of activity in future. And you see a lot of that in the vicarious liability cases where companies have let their employees do, grossly negligent acts or willfully, deliberately, negligent acts, and have been very severely tapped on the nose. And that's generally where it will tend to occur. And because, there's those, they openly talk about in torts notions like, who has the deep pockets, because they will genuinely try and find some kind of compensation for the victim. I mean, it's the whole reason why we've got the notional defendant, in car accident cases where they've nicked off afterwards. You've got that scheme of the notional defendant. I mean, it's super important stuff. Contracts just kind of a bit more of a, it's a first world problem, really, isn't it? Contract law. Torts is a little bit more fundamental. Don't tell Anna I said that. Do you want to start the tutorial? Hello, sorry. Hi. I will go to our contract animation. Actually, first, before I go to our contract animation, to alleviate, I'm sorry for the messiness of my screen. Welcome to my messy mind. What I wanted to bring up for you, can you see that? So, Mary, this is this is what goes on in the scenario that we're going to watch in a second, okay? So you have this, the plaintiff is Shayna. I think actually you'd probably spell it like that nowadays, wouldn't you? She goes on and on about, she wasn't so healthy and she's changed her lifestyle. She's now got this paleo diet. She does meditation. She does yoga, blah, blah, blah. Eyes glaze over. And then we get to the point. She went on this holiday, which was meant to be a yoga retreat on an island in the Philippines. Now, in actual fact, what they say in the animation is that she would have, I'll go back to the beginning here. It said that she would have, I'll put ... nothing to do all day but meditate and yoga, and that she wouldn't have a care in the world. And she says that's what the brochure promised. Beautiful island, beautiful climate. Actually, where are we? Okay. And I don't really know why she thought beautiful climate was in there, but anyway, beautiful island, beautiful climate. Okay, so she arrives there, and when she gets off the plane, she thinks, everything's perfect. It looks all good. The resort looks nice. She gets to her room. The room also looks nice. She goes, now the one thing it doesn't tell you, which I found a little bit annoying, given that, it's fairly clearly based around Baltic Shipping and Dillon and all that. But anyway, it doesn't say how long the vacation was supposed to be. So, I don't know. How long are yoga retreats normally? A week, 2 weeks? Anyway, she looks at the schedule of activities. So she gets there, she looks at the resort, she thinks this is nice. She goes to her room, she thinks this is nice. She must have had an afternoon flight, because she says she looks at the schedule and then she gets an early night because she wants to get up bright and early, obviously, to do, I don't know, yoga, meditation, whatever was on the schedule, right? And then in the middle of the night, she hears this loud bang, hears many smaller, loud bangs, people screaming. Then a man, oh, that's put wrong, in a black mask knocks down the door.
Bit more politically correct, that one.
Oh, yeah, I know, right? Oh, edit that bit out. Okay, so she was stunned. She says her mind was having trouble processing it all. Her and everyone else was marshaled into a recreation hall. They all had their hands bound behind their back. The man said that they were from the Liberation Front for Philippine Freedom. Possibly there's some suggestion, someone else says to her that they're Islamic extremists. She says she's not harmed. They got food, they got water. Interestingly, she says that they yelled a lot, but it was in a foreign language. It was in a foreign language, so she was able to tune most of the yelling out. So apparently that didn't seem to, when she's first talking about it, didn't seem to really bother her, and then later on when she's talking about it, does seem to bother her. And, I don't know, anyway. Most terrorists are angry, yeah. Yes, they are. So after the 3 days, they let the women leave. Never tells you what happened to the men, unfortunately. She gets on the next plane to Australia. And the woman, the solicitor says to her, oh, that wasn't much of a holiday. She says under the circumstances, she thought she'd get the money back. Interestingly, the travel agent says that they're not responsible. Now, I think this is a little bit of a downfall. Torts people. Is the travel agent responsible anyway? Who's the contract with?
Well, they're an intermediary, aren't they? So, like...
So who would it be?
Hotel?
Yeah, it'd be with the resort or whoever's offering this yoga package. Our whatever it would be, 7-day, 14-day, yoga retreat at this Philippine hotel. So I'm not sure quite why it says that there's a Barney between her and the travel agent. Anyway, well, you know what, in Baltic shipping, and this is, I guess, the benefit of reading the thing online rather than just in the casebook, I don't expect you to know this. The travel agent was joined originally before Carruthers at first instance, but very, very quickly the travel agent was knocked out of the game because, an agent is just that, an agent for a principal, unless they've actually done something outside the scope of their agent.
That's what I was going to say. Like, can't they sometimes actually do the package themselves, or actually source XYZ and actually put the package together themselves? Then it might be slightly different.
If that's the case, then yes. If that's the case, and they've specifically done that for her, although I'm thinking if
it doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that, but that would be one of the few instances where I guess she has, but then I don't know, you'd even kind of say that they'd almost just be tangentially involved because that would involve a lot of different contracts with a lot of different suppliers. And again, I'm just trying to think on my feet. You'd step back to first principle again and say, well, the travel agent has probably arranged one contract with the the flight people, one contract with the the transport people to get her to the hotel, one with the hotel, one with whatever tours that she was doing. So it would involve, I think, in that scenario, multiple contracts. But I'm wondering whether the agent might still just be that, an agent. Because ultimately you're looking at the provision of the services being done by the principal, which would be the supplier. I'm guessing.
Most contracts these days around the world, I've noticed, particularly insurance, because it would be considered an act of terrorism, they have like that exclusion clause now. So how does that play in?
Interestingly, that they tried to exclude liability in Baltic Shipping and Dillon, but that was just for negligence. That wasn't like a force majeure event. Although sometimes they will try and exclude liability, not under a force majeure clause, but they'll try and exclude liability for negligence. You will have done that in torts.
Yeah, I know, in force majeure, but I'm just saying it's very interesting. I've noticed, particularly the last couple of years, it started with 9/11, but particularly the last couple of years, you know, planes being blown up, that some of the things that have been happening in the world, when you're traveling, acts of terrorism, they're excluding them. There's an exclusion clause in just about every contract in any of the major, you know, hot spots in the world.
Yeah.
On airlines, hotels, all those kind of things, cruises even.
Yes, there is, and there is good reason for that. Okay, so Shana says, that should be an I. The travel agent says she should have insured the holiday. She says she's promised meditation and yoga, but she got 3 days hands bound, people yelling and guns pointed at her. That's basically the gist of it. Well, I guess we don't really. Who else have we got here? How many people do we have? We have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do we need to go and see the animation then, or has everyone kind of had a little look at that now that we've had a chat about it?
I've actually not seen it. I forgot.
Oh, you've not seen it? Cool. Okay, that's fine. Let us go to my messy screen.
But if everyone else has seen it, you want to carry on, I can.
No. It's only like 2 or 3 minutes. It's all good.
You. Now, I understand you have quite a travel story to tell. Yeah, you might say that. Why don't you start at the start and tell me what I need to know? Right. A couple of years ago, I got into a real lifestyle change. I went from eating junk food and being lazy to working much harder on my body. I now follow a strict paleo diet, and I do a CrossFit workout every day. I also spend time each day practicing meditation and yoga. Wow, I'm impressed. You must be super fit.
She doesn't
No
sound
wonder you
impressed.
needed a holiday. Well, that's just the thing. The holiday I went to was a yoga retreat on an island in the Philippines. It was supposed to be idyllic. Beautiful island, beautiful climate, nothing to do all day but meditate and yoga, without a care in the world. That's what the brochure and the agent promised. I'm guessing it didn't work out quite that way. Well, at first I thought it was perfect. I got off the plane, looked around, and it was exactly what the brochures promised. Then I arrived at the resort, and I was still excited. The room was just what they promised. I had a look at the schedule for the next day, and then went to bed so I could be up bright and fresh. In the middle of the night, though, I woke up to a really loud bang. It sounded kind of like a car backfiring, only 100 times louder. Next thing there were a heap more smaller bangs and screaming. A guy in a black mask knocked down the door to my room and started yelling at me in a language that I didn't understand. You must have been terrified.
I was too stunned to be terrified. I think my mind was having trouble processing what was going on. This guy herded me into a recreation call, along with all the other guests. We heard our hands bound behind us, and then one of the men in black outfits spoke to us in broken English. He told us that he and his friends were from the Liberation Front for Philippine Freedom. That meant nothing to me. Someone told me they are Islamic extremists, but they could have been anything as far as I was concerned.
Were you harmed?
No, actually they treated us pretty well. We got food and water. They yelled a lot, but mostly in languages I didn't understand, so I could tune most of it out. After 3 days, they separated out the men and the women, and they let the women leave. I was on the next plane out of there, back to Australia.
Now that I can understand. It didn't turn out to be much of a holiday in the end, did it?
No. And that's just the thing. I thought, under the circumstances, I would definitely get my money back. However, the travel agency is saying that they are not responsible for an incident like this, and that it was my responsibility to ensure the holiday. But that's nonsense. They promised me a relaxing holiday full of meditation and yoga. What I got was 3 days with my hands bound, having people yell and point guns at me. And they say I'm not entitled to a refund.
Well, let's see what we can do.
Isn't that just one of those comparative retreats you go to? You think life's hard here, so they take you to a place and stress you out and come back and go, wow, Australia's pretty good.
Yeah, that might have been the whole point of the process. Maybe that was a different form of meditation, being able to remain calm and zen-like while there were bombs going off.
Maybe they're trying to show how annoying she is to us by giving her annoying people for her. Eat a steak.
Oh, it's a shame solicitors can't claim damages for annoying clients. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that bit. Now I'll start sharing the. All right. Where is my? Here we are. All right. So this is the scenario. Firstly, actually, I'll go to a blank because I'll ask you a few questions. I'll make you work for your money, eh? Let me just. I'll do a new. No, I won't. Who can tell me what the main? So the issue obviously is whether she can get damages for mental distress that flowed from the incident. Well, that's not, she just wants her money back actually, doesn't she? So, firstly, well no, let's go, I'm sorry to backtrack here. The first question that Anthony asks you in his questions is, has the contract been breached? Was there a breach?
Yes.
Okay.
But with whom?
Ha. So, firstly, let's go back one step. Was there a contract?
One would have to presume that there is because she went through a travel agent and paid something.
Went to travel agent, paid.
To me, there'd have to be a contract with the brochure that was for a specific yoga retreat.
Yeah, I would have thought so too. So we'll say it's Shana versus, I don't know, Yoga Resorts Limited. Okay, good. So there's a contract.
That wouldn't be versus though, would it?
No, it would not. Shana and Yoga Resorts. Okay, so.
Can you just scroll up again a bit first, please?
So what?
Just scroll up a little bit, please.
Sure.
Up or down, sorry.
She was promised that there would be nothing to do all day but meditate and yoga, not a care in the world. That's what the brochure promised. So, Mary, you're right. There was a brochure that set all of this out.
Yeah.
So, obviously, we'll call the purveyor of such things Yoga Resorts Limited. Okay. They promised beautiful island, beautiful climate. And obviously there's pictures that she is interested in. It's a 7 or 14 or however many days package. Let's call it a 14-day package. Okay. Now, what has happened? How many days has she enjoyed? Where did things...
That was her first night, wasn't it?
Yes. So she arrived, went to her room, looked at the schedule, went to bed.
3 days of terrorism on a plane home, so nothing.
3 days terrorist hostage home. So that's what she was, there was a contract, yes. What was she promised?
You'd have to think that that would be the terms.
She was promised this.
Yeah.
Yep.
There, she was promised that. We'll just say 14 days, eh?
Yep.
Then what she got?
3 days of terrorists. Didn't get any of the promises, so there has to be a breach.
So, now, do we think that whatever happened discharged the contract? or didn't discharge the contract?
Well, you can't really say there's a mitigating circumstance that she owed the defendant, 10 or 11 days worth of enjoyment. Therefore, she only lost 15%.
So now I want to try and get you thinking here. Whose fault was it on this first pass through on the facts? Whose fault was it that she didn't get to enjoy?
No one.
Well, it's a terrorist. It's a third party. It's a criminal act of a third party.
Yes.
Well, yes and no, because what about the security at the place where she was?
Well, how about Adil's Palace and every other court case?
But it's not the fault of either party to the contract.
That's right, because the security issue that Mary's thinking about is in the second question that Anthony asks. Okay, but we haven't got to that bit yet.
Okay.
We've only just got to this scenario, a brochure, she thinks this is going to be great. Then the terrorists fly in. We've been given no facts at this stage that there's any problem with hotel security or anything like that. So was there fault on the part of the provider?
Discharged by frustration because it's radically different to what she was promised.
10 gold stars. Yes. So radically, there has been, we use the change in obligation test, don't we? So I'll be a little bit more precise, no fault of either party. The performance has been rendered radically different or possibly impossible, and you use that change in obligation test. So, yes, it probably was discharged for frustration. Okay, if that's the case then, generally speaking, now she wants to get her money back, right? What happens to the situation of when you're trying to get damages for frustration? Where does the loss lie?
Where it falls.
Ha ha. Loss in cases of frustration, the loss usually lies where it falls. And that can be pretty harsh, can't it?
Yep.
So even, for example, unless, there's been so frustration just chops the contract off at the time of the frustrating event, doesn't it? So obviously if there's been some right to be paid that has crystallised before the frustrating event, you can still sue because that right has already crystallised before the contract was chopped off. It's not like rescission where you've unpicked the contract ab initio and it's been like it's never existed in the first place. So if there was a right to payment just before the frustrating event, then, the payment's still got to be made. But other than that, if there's no, rights that have crystallised before that frustrating event, then the loss will tend to lie where it falls.
But would the frustrating event include the 3 days of terrorism though? And then when she was put onto the plane, or would it be ceased at the time she was taken out of her villa?
You would think it would cut in once her enjoyment stopped, because the contract was for
Enjoyment.
So
she wouldn't even get really an hour's refund.
No, generally speaking, the loss will lie where it has fallen. Now, what they did try to argue in Mrs. Dillon's case is a total failure of consideration.
Because they never got anything at all in return. Well, they did get flights, but It's not a significant, it's partial performance at best.
Yes, and this is the problem. When you go to look at your readings for next week for restitution, to get your money back because of total failure of consideration, there must be a total failure. It can't be you got a little bit of benefit, because if you got a little bit of benefit, there's no total failure. And they're pretty strict on that. So even with poor old Mrs. Dillon, interestingly, the Carruthers in first instance and the Court on Appeal, so we had Priestley and a couple others in the Court of Appeal, they both, at both those levels, said that it's interesting. They said the contract was she paid her money for the cruise, and it was something like what an argument that Tam just made before. It was a cruise from point A back to point A, so from departure point to arrival point, and she had paid for that entire experience, and the payment was conditional on getting that experience. And the fact that she actually got home after being rescued was beside the point. The point that they were trying to say was her payment was for that complete experience, and she didn't get that experience. She got, I think it was 10 days out of a 14-day cruise. The ship goes to the bottom of the ocean on the 10th day. She didn't pay for her. Their argument was her payment was conditional, almost like an entire contract kind of argument. Very closely related document. And in fact, they go through and they try and they look at, they say, can we unpick this contract? Was this an entire contract? And they say, no, it wasn't an entire contract. Because remember, when we went through our week on performance, if you're going to call something an entire contract, it has to be really, really clear to all and sundry that payment is, it is a precondition to payment that you get all of what you're bargaining for. It must be a condition precedent. And, it's not the case here. And it wasn't the case in Baltic either. She got 8 days out of a 14-day cruise. Here we have got flights, arrival, and part of a night's sleep. And you know what? I'm trying to go through anything that you could use to shoot that down. I mean, the only thing possibly maybe you could try and argue is that it was de minimis. It was almost nothing that she got. Yes, she got the flight over there.
This would be better fought as a tort, though, wouldn't it, in reality, if you're a lawyer? If you're going for damages and distress and everything more than...
But who are you going to sue?
You're going to sue the same people you're suing now, aren't you?
They haven't done anything wrong yet on this scenario. It's just unfortunate that this extremist group has chosen their hotel to invade. So at this point, we're assuming that the hotel is not actually being negligent in what they've done.
I agree that
so you couldn't
no negligence, but in a scenario, yeah.
Unless there was something wrong that you could point to, and then you're thrown back on, arguments in contract here, aren't you? In terms of just trying to get your money back. So far as tort, you're going to have to actually sue the tortfeasor, and the tortfeasor here is an Islamic extremist group who you're never going to get anything out of. So that's where you would be, unfortunately. In cases of frustration, the loss will normally lie where it falls. The second question that Anthony asks you is, if the resort was a manager was secretly in league with the terrorists and turned off the security systems and allowed the attack to happen. Is there a breach now?
Yes.
Because of good old what kind
Terrorist
of
liability.
yeah.
That's the barmaid and the drunk. I can't remember their case name though.
I think there's a bad
Oh,
yeah. So the resort will then be liable. Now then, they are at fault for this breach, and we are then squarely in the territory of
Baltic.
yes. So in that case, the resort has breached the contract. They have failed to perform their obligations as required, and heads of damage, please. She wants her money back, doesn't she? One. Money back.
So
Let's just throw around potential heads of damage here and then try and work out what would go on.
could you look at wasted expenditure?
Well, that her main expenditure is the money that she's paid out. So I guess it's not really wasted expenditure. It's really price. Wasted expenditure tends to be where you need to incrementally sink money into performance of your obligations, like where a builder expends monies in procuring supplies to perform their work and that kind of stuff. That's the usual heads that you would argue for wasted expenditure. But I am thinking of things like, she said that she wasn't hurt. So it's not like Mrs. Dillon. She can't argue physical injury. But she can argue
mental distress.
Mental distress.
Disappointment. Potentially. Now, how is she going to try and get the money back? Because these were the two precise issues that were at play in Baltic Shipping and Dillon. That would be your so these are the two arguments that were at play. Now I'm just keen to see what you think and whether she could argue both and what the text tells you about.
Well, on the test, she could argue the first one.
On which?
Oh, well, on the two principles, she could argue the first one.
See, she's got a decent, and this was Mrs. Dillon's problem. She argued both because she had pretty good arguments, you would think, for both.
Yeah.
And here you would think you had even a stronger argument because she hasn't had 8 days out of a 14-day. If we're saying just for want of a better term,
3 out of 14.
She's had a plane flight and part of the first night's sleep. The problem is that with total failure of consideration, as we'll talk about next week, they're quite strict on that. And they require you to choose between whether you are going to make a total failure of consideration argument and an argument for disappointment and distress, because there is a logical inconsistency between arguing both. can you think about what that logical inconsistency might be?
Well, if there's a total failure of consideration, then that means that there was no contract. So how can you then sue on disappointment and distress if a contract didn't exist?
Love it. Love it. Tan's had her coffee today. Yes, there's a logical inconsistency there, because if you're saying, I want all of my money back because I got nothing, I got absolutely nothing, what you're effectively saying is, this contract was useless to me. You're dead to me. Do you know what I mean? And if that is truly what you are saying, then what you are leaving by getting everything back, all of the money that you paid out back into your pocket, you're saying this contract was nothing. It was a big fat nothing. When you are arguing for disappointment and distress, what you are arguing is this contract was negotiated, executed, and then their performance started, and then the other party did something wrong that's caused me disappointment and distress. Look at that breach of contract that's caused me this disappointment and distress. So necessarily you're relying on the fact that the contract started, there's been performance, and then something's gone wrong. Do you see what I mean? There's that logical inconsistency between having usually, and Brett Urell is a good one for emphasising this. He's the guy that took Contract B last term. And I think I've probably said it to you, in earlier weeks. If you're ever in doubt as to whether a cause of action will stick, shove another cause of action in the alternative. That's fine. Whack it in there. And that's exactly what they did in Baltic Shipping and Dillon. Now, I would hazard a guess that depending on what you were going to, if you were going to get, $10,000 money back, and you might get maximum of $5,000 for disappointment and distress, you'd probably, you could probably make both arguments as Mrs. Dillon did, but the court would force you to choose. And, you may not even end up arguing disappointment or distress.
But that's what I was going to say. Like, on that basis, surely you go for the total failure of consideration, because she wasn't even there for 24 hours. So the disappointment and distress value you would assume would be relatively small.
Yeah. And the only hazard that I can see with that is that where you're arguing your total failure of consideration, normally courts are quite strict in saying that the failure must be total. So what I guess we would need to see is a few more facts as to precisely what made up the four corners of this contractual deal. Were those flights included in this yoga package? Because she says, remember, she's looked at a brochure. The brochure has promised her a beautiful island, beautiful climate, nothing to do but yoga and meditate. Okay. So if, as we've assumed, it was a package that was offered by the resort, and the travel agent has just, as we've talked about before, maybe tacked on the flights as they do, tacked on the flights on either end of this package, then really she's got very, very little out of that contract at all, hasn't she? She's walked onto the premises, she's gone to her room, she thought, sweet, this looks like the brochure. She's had a little look at the schedule, she's had a few hours sleep, and then there's been all of this kerfuffle. So you might even try like a de minimis kind of argument there. She's got nothing. Effectively. And you try and throw in some of those arguments, even though they were ineffective, from Baltic in relation to total failure of consideration.
So does that mean that you take out then also you'd go, if it was separate contract with the airline, even though they didn't do anything but fly her there and fly her back, that you would then try to make a claim against that contract with them as well, or you would still take that out against the actual hotel?
Well, she's got the flight there and she's got the flight back, so I don't think you'd have any beef with them. I think the issue would be, not getting your 14 days of serenity.
So that could still be included under that exact same contract with that yoga mob, and they would have to pay then for the flights. Would that be how it worked?
No.
But it would still come under the general first consideration of total failure and the costs involved in that whole lot.
This is what I said. You'd have to see the terms of exactly what made up. My point, Mary, was when you're trying to make a total failure of consideration argument, the failure must be total. So if you have enjoyed even a sliver of your contract, it's usually struck out. Okay, so what I'm saying is if you had a decent look at the contractual terms and the terms were just this 14-day package at this resort, what I'm saying is if you take the flights out of it, then she's enjoyed just such a tiny sliver of that, assuming that that's how confined the contract was, just for a stay at a resort. She's enjoyed such a tiny part of that. What I'm saying is you might possibly get across the line with total failure of consideration, although you would have a really hard fight uphill, because usually even if you've got a skerrick of your consideration, it's knocked out. The courts are pretty strict, as I said. So it would all come down to exactly what comprised this package, I think, and how hard or easy it would be to argue a total failure of consideration. In terms of disappointment and distress, so assuming that that's the case, the court's going to make you choose between your total failure of consideration and your disappointment and distress. Assuming that you can't get your total failure of consideration and you choose your disappointment and distress. Here, if the resort manager has done something naughty and there has been a breach, like I said, we're squarely in the territory of Baltic Shipping and Dillon. And so you would be definitely looking at getting damages there for disappointment and distress, because the contract was very clearly for, relaxation and freedom from stress or whatever it was. Just introducing a little bit more rigor on that point, because we're going to be, looking at TFC next week. Damages for mental distress that flowed from the incident where the resort has been involved in a breach there. I want you to think, and we've only got kind of 8 minutes to go, but let's just think through the rules that we've had to look at this week. So we need to think through things like causation. Okay, these would be in your rules section. So you need to establish the defendant's act caused the plaintiff's loss and that legal liability should attach to it. That's your Alexander test. Okay, we use the but for, just like torts do. Okay, here, if we're flipping forward, fast forward to our application, I don't think there's really much of an issue there, is there? We've established that the manager turned the security off. Her loss would not have been suffered but for the resort's wrong. I don't think she'd have any trouble there. Remoteness is the other thing I wanted to talk about. Now, what's your normal test for remoteness in a tort situation because I want to really hammer this home. It's different in contract. Different. This is not going to cause you an issue, Tam, because you haven't been sullied by the mud of torts.
I was going to say, isn't it not like it's stricter than the reasonably foreseeable?
Yes. Yes. So tell me about Hadley and Baxendale.
What was the question?
About Hadley and Baxendale. Oh, that was the crankshaft.
That was the...
So, yeah, so he knew that it was faulty, but he still continued to use it. And then the trailer got unhitched, hit the dad and the son. The passenger then went to sue. He went to, claimed damages or something. The passenger of the other car, didn't they do something?
No, that's a different case.
Oh, well then he failed on the first limb because he knew that it was faulty.
That case that you're talking about.
No, aren't you talking about the one with the mill where the guy sent off the part to get repaired and days, and the mill was out for 5 days because there was no replacement part? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes,
I thought about the wrong one.
I thought Tam was headed in the right direction when she was talking about the trailer. Yes, there was also transport involved in Hadley and Baxendale, but in this particular case, you're right, Mary. The transport didn't involve the faulty trailer being hooked up. The transport involved getting a crankshaft from point A to point B to get fixed. Now, what happened there?
Well,
could the business that had to be completely shut down because this poor transport company, they agreed to transport this crankshaft for repair, but did they know that the whole business was going to shut down?
That was the question, and that's what they said. They said that. Yeah, on the first leg, yes, there was a problem because, there was a 5-day shutdown. But the second thing was that in order to be able to, make a claim, they had to be able to prove that this individual that was involved with the delay had to have that special knowledge, and they had to be able to prove that that person knew that that was vital and it was the only thing that they had, and the whole mill would have to have been shut down because of it.
Yeah. Because, in ordinary business, if a piece of machinery was that vital to your business, it's fairly reasonable to assume that they'd probably have a replacement on hand, in circumstances where the thing got broken down and needed to be taken out for a short while for repair. It's not the kind of damage that you would think would arise just from a bit of delay in transportation. I mean, you feel sorry for the transportation crowd, don't you really? I mean, there's no way that you would expect something like that to happen. So it's a fairly sensible case. But it does show that just reasonable foreseeability is not the test here. So, and I like these two limbs. The first one of Hadley and Baxendale, whether the loss would arise naturally according to the usual course of things, that's one way that they've phrased it. But actually, I quite like, where are we? I'm just trying to find, here we are. No, that's not it. I like the other discussion that they have here. There we go. In the case of Mullins and Kelly Corbett. So there's a few other ways that they've formulated this, but in the contemplation as a result of something that would happen in the great majority of cases, that is the Mullins case, or it's the kind of result that is not unlikely to occur. I quite like those various, I like the way the text shoves in those different formulations under this first limb, because it shows you that it has to be the kind of loss that you probably expect to crop up as a result of this kind of breach. So it's not just that it's something that could be contemplated by a reasonable person, but it's more that it's the kind of thing that would probably happen. In fact, like I said, in the Mullins case, in the great majority of cases, not unlikely, you know, it's the kind of thing naturally that would arise according to the usual course of things. That's the flavour of the kind of thing that you're going to be looking for. Now, in the Victoria Laundry case, because these are the nice little cases that I like to draw out. The Victoria Laundry case.
The dyeing.
Yes, dyeing. Oh my God. That video, I kept it in there because I couldn't be bothered doing another take. But they lost out, they got compensated for the usual business, didn't they? But what did they not get compensated for?
So the new item additional to their business, basically. They haven't lost anything, really.
The super lucrative contracts.
Yeah.
So they had their ordinary...
That's the second limb, isn't it?
Yeah, so they couldn't get the lucrative contract compensated for the loss of the lucrative contracts because they didn't have that special knowledge about those lucrative contracts that would have got them over the line under the second limb. Yeah, so they were tossed out.
That would change a bit, would it, if they're actually getting sued for damages for not delivering on the dye? Because, I mean, they're not held for that, understandable, but...
Well, yes. I don't know, because, again, it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? Whether it's failing to deliver dye or whether it's because they've damaged a boiler, which was the actual thing that happened in that case.
That could be frustration, though, because it's not from either part. Like, it's not fault from either party. Like, the Boilermaker damaged it, not the dye people.
Yeah, I guess that comes back to, you know, the whole rabbit skin thing we're talking about, you know, like there's so many things that, you know, there's a third party or someone, if you don't deliver, you don't deliver, and then you're liable to the person who didn't deliver.
But then if you go back to the beginning, they chose to buy a second-hand boiler, right, instead of new equipment, and then it was damaged on delivery. And so, you know, like if they really wanted to, the argument in terms of that second limb, you know, if they really wanted to get those lucrative contracts, they should have probably bought in specialists in boilers, and that person wasn't. They were just buying second-hand boilers. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there was arguments against that second limb as well.
I think that regardless of who the supplier is, whether they are a second-hand supplier or whether, you know, the business really should have bought from a more reputable firm.
Yeah, but they weren't boiler specialists.
But that's not really the point.
Doesn't matter.
The point is they are contracting for a job to be done, and the nature of the supplier doesn't really enter into the equation. It might make more business sense to get a specialist, but that's not going to factor into the equation so far as damages in contract are concerned.
But even the repairers of the boiler weren't specialist boilers.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. I mean,
the nature of the supplier and the good business sense of the deal doesn't come into the equation when you're factoring in contractual damages, when you're trying to work out contractual damages.
Okay. But what confused me about it is it doesn't make good business sense to lose all these contracts and wait for 5 months. Wouldn't you just bring in a boiler specialist to fix it?
You probably would, but Mary, again, that is a question of business nous. What we are talking about here is specific rules of contract law that relate to what damages that you may claim or not claim when someone does not perform their part of their contractual obligations.
Yeah.
So you need to keep the two things very separate. And in fact, I had this same discussion with one of my honours students in my legal risk class. You've got to keep the whole oh, gee whiz, you know, why are we even talking about this? Because it doesn't make business sense what they did. You've got to try and keep those questions very separate to our question.
Yeah, we're asked to critically, to critically
if you saw this on
analyse.
exam, you would say to yourself, like the savvy law students you are, yeah, they're pushing me down the examination of Hadley and Baxendale, Victoria Laundry. I need to analyse this in terms of the case law that we've been given to look at.
Yeah.
In this scenario, and you're not going to wander off into discussions of, you know, business commercial sense. Okay, so
I
that's
understand that.
that's
I just in reading it to myself, I'm thinking, why the hell would you let yourself into this position?
Yeah, I know, I understand, but we need to talk about being lawyers, and often, you know what, whether they're stupid clients or whether they're sensible clients, at the end of the day, so long as they pay their bill, we don't really
They're paying me, I'll do whatever.
we don't really care. We don't really care. And you know what? I'll tip to the wise here. Good test if you think you've got a stupid client. Get some money in trust up front. Okay? Big test. If you've got a client you think that has a marginal case and you don't think that they're really, you know, above board in terms of commercial good sense, get them to pay you 5 or 10 grand in a trust. Get the money up front and then press go for them. If they want to press go. That's the way. Anyway, I hope that this has answered your questions in terms of the actual tube problem. We got so far as looking at remoteness. I don't think we would have a problem with remoteness so far as this tutorial problem is concerned, because, having the hotel manager turn off the security system and having terrorist attack in a hotspot like the Philippines is something that would arise naturally, it's certainly according to the usual course of things. If you've got no security, hotel full of rich first world people on a yoga retreat, wouldn't that be a terrorist target? I think probably. Okay, especially in this day and age. Mitigation doesn't really... Now, tell me, before we get here, I'm trying to go quickly because I know that people get cranky when you go too far over time. But mitigation is assumed unless what? And let me just tell you, I don't think we've got an issue of mitigation here. But mitigation doesn't even get judicially discussed unless what?
Well, isn't that where if they've just sat back and done nothing about it?
Yes.
And let the loss go on?
Yes. So unless it will be assumed that the plaintiff has mitigated their loss, unless the defendant specifically raises it as an issue.
That was where my jib was, that the yoga girl, she could have stayed and had 11 more days. She didn't mitigate.
Yes, she could have stayed.
That'd be my defence, straight up. Yeah.
Exactly. Stop.
And that's also a question of fact too, isn't it? Like, it comes down to a question of fact, and the onus is on the defendant.
The onus is on the defendant very squarely. Yes, yes. So there's no real issue of mitigation here. Heads of damage, we've already looked at that. Mental distress, I think she'd have a reasonable, like we were tossing up, I think that she would have a reasonable argument in terms of mental distress, because it's just, you can tell that the lecturer's pushing you to discuss Baltic Shipping Company and Dylan, can't you, because of the way that things were argued on this second question here, where there is actual fault on the hotel's part, very squarely. So you'd have to talk about that case. You'd have a decent case for mental distress. Unlike Baltic, there was no physical injury, so you wouldn't be talking about personal injury. You could throw in perhaps maybe a discussion of inconvenience, but it really went more than that, didn't it? I think you'd probably get better prospects of claiming for mental distress. So that's our little scenario. I think there was one final question that Anthony asked, which was if the breach, if there was a breach here, would you get compensation under the first limb? I think you would. We've already looked at that. If the hotel manager turned off security in a terrorist hotspot like the Philippines, you know, of a hotel that was full of cashed up first world tourists, do you think it would arise naturally according to the usual course of things? And bear in mind also the hotel manager was part of this Islamic terrorist group. So I think I'd be gunning for yes. I don't know, what's your thoughts?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. Where the managers not only just stupidly turned or accidentally turned off the security, but he's actually in cahoots with the terrorists. I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound. I think they're vicariously liable for his, you know, conduct. And if you're employing an Islamic extremist, then I think, you know, them turning off the security in a terrorist incident would be according to the usual course of things. I don't know. That's what I'd be arguing for her anyway. Any problems with that?
No.
Cool. I didn't type things down this time. Application conclusion. Sorry about that. You can fill it in yourself. Actually, you know what? Now that you're over assessment number 2, why don't you fill in that for me? And I'll put the best IRAC up next week. I don't have time to actually fill that out myself because I'm marking all of your wonderful videos. Cool. All right, unless there's any other questions.
I've actually got something that came across my way today. Does this take photos? It does. This is something that's along damages.
Yeah.
On one of my development sites, another builder built a property, and that's it there. And this came, someone sent it to me today. They built the house 1.5 meters below the driveway, and the driveway is 1.5 meters long, so they can't drive cars into the garage. This is one of my competitors.
Oh no!
So as you can see on the photo, they've ripped the roof up because they're talking about maybe raising the garage. But as I've said to them, then if you raise the garage, you're going to have a staircase coming out of the garage across a hallway, which then blocks off the hallway.
Oh no!
And that's not the first time. In the last 24 months, this is the biggest one in the region. I can't say the region just so I don't get done for anything. But they've had to buy 2 houses because they've made them and now are just horrible and they're collapsing. And they're the biggest because they're 5-6 grand cheaper.
Oh no!
And they build houses on the wrong properties because they don't do surveys, they don't do proper structural. So they have to buy houses at the end and then they don't do levels.
Oh
and
my
you
Lord.
can't drive a car in the garage. So talk about damages coming.
It reminds me of our assessment number 2.
Yeah.
They didn't do the levels.
Didn't do just everything about it. Just,
Oh my gosh.
the list continues. So they've done ones where you're, putting driveways on walkway entries. So people are walking into your driveway and, just things like that.
Oh my gosh, that is just awful.
That's something that's,
Wow.
there's a big damage problem there. You're $100,000 into a build.
Yes.
You can't inject sand under it.
Oh my lordy. Wow. Well, unless we have it, and that, thank you for sharing. I don't think that will come up on the video.
No, sadly it won't, but
what we're seeing for those viewers at home is a house that is substantially below the level of the roadway, and there's no real way into the garage. without kind of your car folding in the middle. Wow, that's terribly negligent. Just as well as a competitor and not your mob. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, thanks for that. Same bat time, same bat channel next week. Unless you have any queries, you can face me. Other than that, thanks, guys. And I will stop sharing. Bye.